So, Andrew, let me start with you. If you just give an overview, what is the 1789 Alliance?
Sure. The 1789 Alliance is an organization essentially that was created to help catalyze and support and build a network of organizations similar to what Michael has built here in Texas with Empower Texans, that is focused on empowering citizens to hold their state and local governments accountable to the citizens, so perpetuating self-governance. So what we do at the 1789 Alliance is to build and launch new organizations across the states, connect with activists and with actually donors that are interested in perpetuating this mission, having an independent organization that's dedicated to that, but also networking together existing organizations, sharing best practices and creating a reinforcing network of independent organizations across the states that are dedicated to the same mission.
Michael, Empower Texans has been around for, how long have you guys been around now?
12 years now, which I'm surprised to still be alive at this point.
Well, how many times is it that the Republicans in Texas have come after you guys for just exposing what bad guys were doing?
Yeah, I mean, so for us, it's this interesting kind of dichotomy where we hear this a lot. The fractions within the Republican. I actually see very few fractions in the Republican Party when it comes to voters, to the millions of people who go and cast ballots. They are remarkably unified on the things that they want to see accomplished in government. Where you see the fault lines is among this very small bit of elected officials who people who want to say one thing, do another, and they're the ones who get very frustrated when you start exposing them for saying one thing and doing another. And so that we're constantly at Empower Texans and Texas Right to Life and Texas Homeschool Coalition, these buddies in arms groups that try to show the delta between what is said and what is done. The elected officials are shooting at us constantly. But the voters and the activists, it's very rewarding and reassuring to know that the citizenry is still holding fast to the good and right things that Republicans claim to want to do. But that's the difference.
So nationally and internationally, when one hears the term Straussian, they tend to think of an economist. Here in Texas, you think Straussian, and it's one of those Republicans who probably, if you look real hard, drew a little line down from the D to make it look like an R. And you guys have been battling this for a while.
Yeah, so for those folks who have the misfortune, like yourself, of not being from Texas, we have benefited over the last 15, 20 years in Texas of not being California, not being New York, not being Illinois. And we've gotten more right than we've gotten wrong. But don't confuse being the least drunk person at the bar with being a model of sobriety. And in Texas, we've managed to know which pickup out in the parking lot is ours. We got that pretty well settled. California is in the corner drooling on itself, muttering about the jobs it lost. And so we have done better than the other states, which is, your mom was right, don't compare yourself to other people. But we've kind of allowed ourselves to get sucked into that myth of, just because we're better off than everyone else. And that has allowed us to kind of start buying our own PR as Texans, where we think, anyone who's a Republican is out to, do good and, promote all the values and principles and the economic policies. In fact, what we see is a lot of Republicans, as you mentioned, in the Texas legislature, were folks who, play with their marker, when the report card gets home to make the F look like an A, and to make the D look like an R. And I think that's where a lot of the policies that we saw our former House, now mercifully almost former House Speaker Joe Straus, was a guy who was far more who's
They're
far
clapping
more,
for you are clapping for former, not for
Yeah.
Strauss. Let's
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
let's make that clear.
he was much more interested in appeasing the Democrats, because that's where his power came from. He came into power with a majority of the Democrats and a small number of Republicans. And that's where he'd spent the past decade maintaining that kind of a balance, and then add to, Republicans who get elected who, they want to tell you that they're going to do good things. When they get to Austin, they'd really rather be taken out to dinner by the lobbyists, and their spouses would really like to rather go on the fancy trips. And so they do the wrong things. They do the other things. And that whole kind of cabal of either wrong-thinking Republicans or weak-kneed Republicans kept siding with the Democrats, giving us Joe Strauss as our speaker. The writing kind of came on the wall. The Republican, again, a very highly unified Republican Party in terms of voters and the grassroots, pushing hard against Speaker Strauss and against that, against the mindset, the mentality there, have all kind of led to Joe Strauss saying he's not running for re-election, not seeking re-election in the Texas House, not going to be Speaker of the House, because we started seeing a push to do this unimaginable thing, which was elect the Speaker of the House out of the Republican caucus, rather than let the Democrats pick. So it all keeps going back to that question of accountability. Suddenly, the Speaker of the House in a chamber that is 2/3 Republican, it is somehow controversial in Austin. This notion that the 2/3 of the Texas House Republicans should be the ones deciding who the Speaker is, rather than the Democrats. So that's a controversial notion in Austin. In the rest of the state, people go, "You mean that's not how it is already?" They're shocked by that.
I'm learning that freedom is a controversial notion in Austin as well. So.
Yes, yeah. We haven't banned straws yet in Austin, but they're trying.
They're trying. So, Andrew, this conversation on accountability, one of the things that Empower Texans and others around the country affiliated with 1789 Alliance are doing are just simply scorecards to show that some Republicans really don't vote like they say they will.
I think that's a great point. Michael mentioned that one of the core functions of what Empower Texans is able to do that inspires and educates and empowers citizens to actively hold their legislators accountable is showcasing the delta between what they say and what they do. And certainly at the state level and certainly at local levels, people often don't know how that level of government is actively, constantly affecting their lives, because they're watching what's happening in Washington, D.C. and wish casting about how they can change things there, when ultimately the core of how they can, I don't want to say erosion of the principles of self-governance that this whole country has been founded on, but our focus on D.C. for generations has truly eroded the core sense of self-governance that we have. How do we hold our local and state level officials accountable? And that's why it's so important that organizations like Empower Texans and like Reclaim New York, like Iowans for Tax Relief exist, because one of the core functions with the scorecard is they showcase the delta between what an elected official says and what they actually do. And it's done in an objective way that communicates that easily for people to take and showcase, rub their nose in it and be like, what is going on here? Another important thing that these organizations do is they define conflict. Because oftentimes what we've seen countless, certainly at the national level, it's always a fight about what is the narrative, what is the conflict, how and who's defining it? What battleground are we going to fight an issue on? And as conservatives, as liberty-minded, freedom-loving people, sometimes we cede that ground and allow someone else to define what we're going to fight about for us. And when we do that, the battle is already lost. And so it's important, one of the more important functions, additionally with scorecards, is defining conflict. If an organization is able to properly define the conflict, certainly in Texas, where 2/3 of the legislature is supposed to believe in fiscal sanity, you'd think it would be easier to define conflict, but it's not, is it, Michael?
Right.
And another thing is standing up to bullies. To give citizens the confidence that they need to actively stand up to governments that are taking advantage of them, whether it be cronyism, whether it be increased taxes, decreased liberty, decreased opportunity. you need a partner and an organization, something that can help provide the tools necessary to inspire you to do that. And that's a lot of what we're trying to do.
So I wonder if both of you could talk about this. And Michael, I know Empower Texans has had this issue of being sued for daring to be transparent or cause other people to be transparent. But if both of you could talk about that because it's not just Texas with the 1789 Alliance, you've got people battling across the country. And I'm always amazed. I mean, this is what got Nikki Haley elected in South Carolina as governor, was this issue of transparency, that Republicans are as bad as Democrats when it comes to not wanting people to know what they're doing.
Yeah, you can look at, starting in the 1980s, you started seeing these state-level speech regulator entities be set up around the country. In Wisconsin is the Government Accountability Board, in Texas, the Texas Ethics Commission, all with these very fluffy names that sound like the kind of things that we would support.
Ethics is the underline. They use the word ethics a lot.
Yeah, ethics and accountability, all great words, and yet most of them are aimed at protecting government, protecting the cronies in the Capitol, and trying to silence anyone who questions them. I think that that's the challenge that each one of us should fully embrace, is to go into our states and root out those boards and commissions that exist to try to silence citizens. We've experienced it in Empower Texans. I hope that none of you were targets of what happened in Wisconsin, but you can read on the pages of the Wall Street Journal the horrible activities, literally pre-dawn, no-knock raids on people's homes because they supported Governor Walker, period. I mean, just horrible abridgments of our First Amendment rights taking place in the states. And I would suggest to you that's because we have allowed that to happen as conservatives. We have spent so much time, I love the word used a second ago, Andrew, dreamcasting on Washington, D.C. We see a problem, and as conservatives, we say, just like the liberals, oh, what can Congress do to fix it? That's wrong. That's what our founding fathers envisioned. And when we look at these problems, and so we spent so much time focusing on Washington, D.C., that we ignore the higher levels of government, the more important levels of government, which are the local levels of government. It's shocking to me how much real practical power your state representative, your city council member, your school board member has on life, and on your life and your family's life. And yet, most people can't name their school board member. Most people don't know who their mayor is. 2% to 5% of the people turn out for elections for cities and schools, and yet we're all hyper-focused on what Kim Jong-un is going to wear to the next summit meeting. I mean, it's mind-numbing. And while those are important issues, and as citizens, we should be able to rub our bellies and pat our heads at the same time. We should be able to both focus on the school board and on the White House. We should be able to hold members of Congress accountable and members of our legislature and our city council. That's our job as citizens, and it's, I get it. It means that maybe we have to turn off Dancing with the Stars or whatever occasionally, but that's our job as citizens. That's what you kind of sign up for when you say you're an American, is self-governance. And self-governance means doing the hard job of governing. We don't elect governors, we don't elect, we elect governors. We don't elect leaders, we elect servants. We're supposed to be the leaders in our system of government.
Amen.
And yet we have completely tossed that out the window, and we'd rather
this
be
is
entertained.
all confusing the City Council of Austin. This conversation here.
But all these things work together where we have to be engaged so that we don't allow these petty bureaucracies and these dictatorships under the guise of state agencies to come and deny us of our right to speak and our right to participate. The old adage is true, and if you're not using your rights, someone will take them away. And to the extent that we're not paying attention, to the extent to which there are a lot of entities and a lot of agencies that want to shut us up, and therefore we in this room and all of our friends and family have got to get more engaged to reclaim that which is our heritage in our republic.
Andrew, we're talking about bureaucrats wanting to take our rights away. It seems like one of the issues of accountability for Republicans at the federal and the state level is this idea that the legislature passes the buck to bureaucrats, so they can't be held accountable for what the bureaucrats are doing.
That's complete bunk. I mean, that's a nice story to tell. I think that's ridiculous because, as Michael said, we don't elect leaders, we elect servants. And it's their responsibility as our emissary to govern that state agency. If they're saying, oh, well, the Texas Ethics Commission is an independent actor. No. It's appointed, I believe, in Texas by the governor, the speaker, and lieutenant governor.
That's right. Yeah.
Those are all people that, well, except for the speaker, are directly elected by the people and the citizens of Texas. The idea that you can pass the buck to a bureaucrat or a state agency does not make sense just theoretically in terms of our constitutional makeup. That's not what the founders ever talked about. They didn't say we're going to create a state agency that will govern over the people. They were trying to figure out how we could create a government that was governed by the people.
Right.
So
where does this go with the 1789 Alliance, building out organizations at the state level to stand up? I mean, how do you find states that you think, I'm assuming every state is, but where do you build out with the 1789 Alliance?
You know, it is a tricky question. I think that based on, one, we've kind of surveyed the nation to an extent. I haven't visited all 50 states yet, but I'm getting close. And one of the common themes that you see, and I think you hit on it, is transparency. Michael was mentioning some state agencies that want to shut citizens out of the process. There are legislators and the body itself that is not built transparently. Wyoming, for example, nobody lives in their state capital for the most part. Everyone is very spread out. It takes 4 hours to get anywhere in Wyoming. They don't broadcast the recording of what's happening on the state floor anywhere. Citizens have no idea. It's a black box, what's happening. And that is just completely wrong. It's an easy fight to have as well because, you know, setting partisanship completely aside, it's hard to find any common sense citizen who's going to say, you know what, no, I think that whatever they're doing there should be done in the dark and I shouldn't have any idea of what's going on. And it kind of goes back to one of the core functions of what these organizations do is showcase and put sunlight where there is darkness. Because when that happens, people actually become engaged and empowered to hold people accountable.
And I think what's been very exciting to watch is Andrew has been doing 99% of the traveling around not Texas, has been finding there are actually a fair number of groups and organizations and kind of loose alliances of citizens who have all kind of independently of each other become aware of this problem, what we now call the deep state, which I think is a fantastic phrase. I'm disgusted I didn't think of it. But as you sit there with the apparatus sitting out there at the state and local level that then feeds into the problem in Washington D.C., who are all trying in their own ways and in the kind of the culture of their state to start fighting back and start pushing back, and it's been very encouraging. Getting reports of groups in Iowa, and goodness sake, in New York State, on Manhattan Island, you've got folks who are wanting to take back their government in the sense of federalism and good government and reducing the burden of government on people's lives. It's very exciting. And there's this movement out there that that no one's running. It's just people have become fully aware of the problems around them and are starting, in the grandest American tradition, are taking action.
And they're doing it in ways in which in New York makes sense for New York, in Iowa that makes sense in Iowa. This isn't a proprietary formula that we're applying here. It's truly a market force, and I think that's what Michael is referencing when we've witnessed groups that are trying to start. And that's part of what our role at the 1789 Alliance is to help them connect those dots faster. Because it truly is as sort
Learn
of
from mistakes.
right, learning from mistakes and sharing best practices. But there's a hole in, if you want to call it kind of the political value chain or the infrastructure that we talk about. You know, we have state policy think tanks across the country, I think in almost every state, that serve a very important function, but they don't quite go where these organizations are going. You know, perennially or cyclically, you have a lot of money being spent on campaigns and politics to try and elect the right people. But whenever those elections are over, that's gone. That infrastructure doesn't last. So this type of an organization or a group of citizens is incredibly important to supporting the overall infrastructure necessary to perpetuate a reform or a political reform movement in a state. And I would argue that with an organization similar to Empower Texans or Iowans for Tax Relief or Reclaim New York or Conduit Network in Arkansas, that type of political movement is much more possible and sustainable. Because we are fighting for people's attention, right? I think that, you know, to put it in terms of media that we consume on a daily basis, the sexy stuff is what's being pitched to us constantly, and it's not in, you know, well, in Austin, some people think it's sexy to talk about things in Austin, but for the most part, it's not your local, you know, news. You're watching something they're broadcasting about what's happening at the White House or what the president tweeted in the morning or, you know, that. But ultimately, as Michael mentioned, the thing that impacts them the most is what that city council is going to vote on at 3 p.m. that day that you don't have a full agenda over and you have no idea what they're talking about.
So Congressman Heiss, when he was here earlier, he was talking about needing to vet because we have a lot of people who campaign and go to Washington and they get up there and they don't actually do what they say they've done. So how do you vet them? And it almost makes me wonder if conservatives have fallen into a trap of we need people who aren't career politicians to go to Washington, but those are the people who are least likely to have a track record, as opposed to using, for example, a scorecard and finding the guy who's been in the state legislature for 5 years standing up to leadership voting no, so we know this guy isn't going to be buckled by the leadership when they go to Washington.
You know, Moses had it right. Actually, Moses' father-in-law had it right. You know, the way you should structure judges over tens and the hundreds, and yeah, and that I think that you're right. We have begun to lose a little bit of sight of that. That we want to look for that maverick outsider, but unfortunately, what happens a lot is someone comes in and anyone can tell us anything. And that ends up what happening. They tell us exactly what we want to hear, what polling data says we want to hear. They feed to us the lines of conservatism, of freedom and liberty, and then they go to office and they do whatever the heck they want to do anyway. And we should be more discerning in that. We as conservatives, we as voters, should start saying, I'm going to trust you with a little bit, and then I'll trust you with a little bit more, and a little bit more. Trust but verify. We want these folks to start off proving that they can manage the Hamlet before we let them have their fingers on trillion-dollar budgets.
You mentioned the word discernment. I've used that word a whole lot in the last couple of years about conservative discernment of candidates, that we do tend to gravitate towards the people who tell us what we want to hear, and they show up at all the meetings. And you've got a situation in Texas where everybody runs as a Republican because you have to run as a Republican to get elected. And in Georgia, the local level, up until recently, everyone ran as a Democrat. So you'd find people who voted consistently at the federal level Republican, but if they wanted to have a say in sheriff, they had to vote Democrat. And if you wanted to be sheriff, you had to vote Democrat. How do you weed people out? And I guess the scorecard is actually one good way for state officials to be able to have a benchmark.
I tell you, there was a member of Congress from Texas, Randy Weber. He's not on Fox News every day. He's not one of the guys rushing in front of the cameras. But he's a kind of a good journeyman member of Congress. He votes right. He has high ratings on all the conservative indexes out there. And it was not a surprise to anyone from Texas, because when he served in the Texas legislature, he was a solid vote. He's reliably offered the right amendments and took the right votes. And previous to that, he'd done the same thing in local office. And I think that's the kind of pattern, and it's very easy for us to say, oh my gosh, that guy's a career politician. No, he was a plumber. He wasn't a career politician. I mean, he literally, throughout the term in the Texas legislature, was still a plumber.
How can you be a career politician in this Texas legislature when it only meets for a couple days every other?
Well, there are those who try to do it. So that's a different discussion. But I think that's where we need to take a deep breath. And yes, there's the problem with the career politician. On the other hand, there's the problem with the people who amass a lot of power to themselves, and we've got to find the right balance together of how much unknown are we willing to take with people. I know this is going to frustrate every person in the room when I say this, but Barack Obama kind of did it right. I mean, he was a community organizer, which we can be dismissive of, but in Chicago politics, for some of you who understand Chicago politics, he had his little area that he was responsible for. He proved that he could do that, and then he ran for the state senate. We all may hate it, but he proved he was reliable in the state senate for the left. And then they let him run for the U.S. Senate. He proved he was reliable to them there, and then they made him president of the United States, and they hoped emperor of the planet. But we should take a page from that. It's not wrong to look at the way the other side operates and find the good tactics that work, while keeping in mind the strategies that we're aiming for. And that while you don't want Barack Obama, we want our version of a good, reliable conservative who's going to be fighting for liberty and working to pull the deep state out by its roots. That's what we're looking for.
And not to go off track here, but it sounds very much like the JCN we'll get into later on this list of judges that we know these guys have a good track record.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. No, that's exactly the case. Look at Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh. Go down like Don Willett, who many of us in Texas are big fans of now on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. These are people with great histories that you can look at, and there's no surprise. Anyone who wants to, they're going to be surprised by how Don Willett rules on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals was clearly not paying attention to 12 years on the Texas Supreme Court.
I'm kind of torn now, though, that he's on the Fifth Circuit because he doesn't tweet as much.
I know. It's very disappointing. Yeah, it's very sad.
Yeah.
I'll start reading the footnotes of his opinions, I think, for the tweets he would have put out.
Yeah. So, Andrew, if there are folks here, I know we've got them fairly diverse from across the states who are interested in setting up accountability groups. I know you and I have had conversations about doing one in Georgia where you've got Republicans in Georgia trying to give Amazon $1 billion taxpayer dollars to come set up shop in Atlanta.
Isn't everybody doing that?
Yeah, pay no attention to it. Illinois offered them $7, which is more than the Illinois budget right now.
They did the same with Caterpillar,
$7?
Exactly, yes.
It was what they scrounged in there.
What should people do if they want to set up an accountability group in their states?
Well, come talk to me. But also just plug in with, first find out what exists currently. Because there's a good chance that there are a group of citizens that are actively trying to do this. Again, it doesn't happen just because, it doesn't not exist because we say that there isn't anything there. So find out who are the people that are actually going to city council meetings, who are the citizens that actively are regularly talking about the state legislature. Because there's no magical formula that makes up who would be, maybe for you, a Michael Quinn Sullivan, but that as I've met with other state
Lord help you.
It's more true than you know. State-based leaders of these things are people that truly care about the mission, and it's communicating that vision. And there are people out there that want to help you build this type of infrastructure, this type of an organization, because it's truly necessary. It fills a void. It helps give people. It helps them cut through the marketing BS that you hear on the campaign trail and actually gives them measurable things to judge actions instead of just listening to words, as you mentioned. If we're truly going to, and we've heard this time and time again, the conservative movement doesn't have a pipeline of recruitment to promote good candidates to office. Well, apparently the goal is to go to Washington, D.C., which I don't quite understand, but we don't have that pipeline. This type of an organization helps qualify people that way. So find out who's out there. Plug in with them, build a cadre of people that you can rely on to do this, and then look for the resources and put together. I mean, I have an MBA, so I think in frameworks a lot and business plans. And it's probably far too structured to be doing anything in politics. But honestly, put together a plan of how you can impact the state legislature, how you can do 2 or 3 things, apply a strategy to impact the city council, and start talking to people about it. Look for people that are interested in supporting that vision. Because what we've seen, what you need to have happen if you're going to have a highly successful organization is you need talent and you need money, honestly. The world of politics is run by people who want to see good things happen and they want to help donate to those things. So that would be the beginning, but certainly I'd be more than interested to talk to you if you're from a state and you don't think that something like this exists. Love to talk to you about it.
I actually am kind of surprised. Conversations I have with people who don't think there are organizations like this in their states, it's like, hey, yeah, there actually is. It flying under the radar, and I guess part of the problem as well is sometimes you get institutional inertia that I see this inside the SPN network, which is a great organization, a great network but occasionally you have one that just isn't living up to what it should be, and sometimes you got to start a new one, if nothing else, for competition to force them to get to their A game.
That's right. There's no problem with having multiple organizations that can be comrades in arms in these things. I mean, Empower Texans isn't the only grassroots organization in Texas. Sorry.
It's the only one
only one that matters. No, but I think the push for a lot of this is kind of the realization of the conservative movement. For a long time, we pushed that Victor Hugo quote, "Nothing is as powerful as an idea whose time has come." No, that's nonsense. Any of you who've worked in politics know that's complete rubbish, because everything is more powerful than a good idea whose time has come. The junior lobbyist working for a third-rate lobby firm with rented office space on the wrong side of town in the Capitol is more powerful than a good idea. Now, what gets a good idea across the finish line is a lot of engaged citizens, a lot of people getting involved and rallying around it and creating that political wave and muscle that overcomes the bureaucracy and overcomes the lobby. And but it takes time, and I think that's the thing that we look at July 4th, 1776, and big shocker, those guys didn't show up on the 1st and go, "Who wants a revolution?" They actually, there were decades of labor of trying to convince people of getting Sam Adams with his committees of correspondence. And I think that we have to be dedicated to the long-term fight of rallying our friends, because the good idea came in the Americas in the 1720s. It was when the good idea came, and it took a lot of time and a lot of blood to get there. Hopefully, the good ideas that we need to reform government today don't require a lot of blood, but they are going to require our time. They require us spending time, putting down your keyboard and go to your neighbor's house and have a conversation. Turn off the remote control and drive across town and testify before the city council. Those kinds of things, real honest-to-God interactions with humans, starting to build that network and build the rally is what we have to be committed to.
Humans are germy.
I know they are.
Look, we've got just over 10 minutes left. I want to deviate just a little bit. How did the two of you, you both, I've known you for a while, y'all both got a passion for this. How'd you get into this? I know you largely were forced into it by this time.
Yeah, my answer is done.
Look, I was a newspaper reporter and had zero interest in politics as a newspaper reporter. I was not interested in it, and right up until the moment that literally the first newspaper I was at, the guy who covered state and local politics died at his desk, and So someone
There's a
can go
metaphor
cover
there for
politics.
something.
And so it was my turn. And covering local politics, city government in Denison, Texas, up on the Red River, I was shocked how often there would be important issues coming before the city council, directly affecting people's lives, and I was the only person in the room because I was paid by the newspaper to be there. And that impacted me, that frustrated me. My kind of interest in politics kind of blossomed from that, from the lack of participation, wound away in all sorts of rambling ways until ended up at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, our state think tank, SPN member think tank in Texas. And what we came to realize there at TPPF and looking at our friends in the SPN network was that, you know, you can have lots of really good ideas, but without political muscle behind those good ideas, you know, those policy reports end up being doorstops. They end up being levels for desks with misshapen legs.
Like this table. Huh?
Like the table there. Yeah, it's a nice job. It might be one of my research
I
reports holding it up
Greg
there. Yeah.
Earlier.
I think the you know, so we started Empower Texans with that view of how can we get citizens engaged in their government, get more engaged in their government. Along the way, Andrew was looking for something to do while waiting for security clearances to go work in the federal government, and he accidentally, I think, applied for an internship with us, which the worst
Big
thing
mistake.
he ever did in his life, I think. From you know, his life could have been so much more pleasant had he not done that, but it completely spoiled him for anything else.
Well, I had an interest in politics, unlike Michael. So, but yeah, I mean, that pretty much describes it. I kind of fell into it, but also it was something that I instantly fell in love with. I think that, you know, I'm a political science and history major out of university, and political theory was always very fascinating to me. So I believe that doing what we are doing and engaging in what we engage in is kind of the working end of this experiment called liberty that this country is built on. And its core function is around this idea of citizens are self-governing. And being able to work for greater citizen engagement in the process at all levels of government, I think is such an essential function that if I'm not doing this, then I don't feel like, you know, me not doing it's going to have the whole thing fall apart. But you get the sense that it's eroding, and we have to do something to reinvigorate it. And so that's what really kind of has me in the fight.
You know, when you see school districts like La Jolla ISD in South Texas, a poor school district, 80-some% of the students are, you know, low income, and yet somehow the school district finds the money to build a water park and a 27-hole golf course. You know,
Not just football stadium.
Yeah. We're way beyond crazy football stadiums now. But those kind of things happen in large part because we allow them. Yeah, because we don't participate, because we're not showing up. All it takes is a couple of people to start showing up and saying, what the hell are you doing? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we need to start saying that more often, and not be cowed into, oh, well, this is for the children, or you don't understand. You're right. I don't understand how you are that stupid to do this. You know, I don't understand. And that, you know, we've allowed ourselves, and because of the complexity of government and those things, to think that we have to be some sort of experts if we're going to be engaged in government. And we'll also be cowed into silence. And we need to start just being a little louder and a little more indignant in a lot of these cases.
And curious.
Yeah, and more curious to see where those dollars are going. But if we would start showing up and asking the very simple question of why and what the hell are you thinking, that can put a stop to things. You know, I don't like to spend money. I prefer not spending cash, and so when I travel, I stay at hotels that, well, they're rarely hotels, usually motels, where you turn on the lights and the cockroaches scurry, and I'm okay with that. You know, they're good snacks if you get hungry, I guess. But politics operates a lot like that. Just takes a little bit of sunlight, and the cockroaches go scurrying. They will go, but when you and I don't show up, when we don't bring our our lit torches, they're able to run rampant. They're able to do all sorts of horrible things, building 27-hole golf courses rather than hiring math teachers.
Who needs math teachers? We got Common Core.
That's right. Yeah. Who needs to add in? You've got Google to add now. But you and I are the light. That is what our system of government was built on. You and I are supposed to be the light going into government. And when we don't show up, you can count on your neighbor to do it, but your neighbor's probably an idiot. You need to go do it, and then you need to get your neighbor to go with you. You and I have that responsibility. We have the first responsibility to be engaged and involved. That's what 1789 is about. That's what Empower Texans is about, and hopefully that's what everyone in the room is about.
Look, thank you very much for being here to talk about it. If you want more information, Andrew really is the guy to talk to about the 1789 Alliance and what you can do in your states. Andrew Kerr, Quinn Sullivan, thank you.
Thank you.